Well, today we have an absolute gem that unfortunately I would have loved to buy, but it was unfortunately sold before I could even make an offer. And that is this 1966 Cadillac Fleetwood 60 Special. Not a Fleetwood Brougham, which was a different model, or I should say a trim line within the Fleetwood series. If you got the Brougham, you got the standard vinyl roof you had in the interior, the picnic tables, and you had the footrests. This is not a Brougham, so it does not have the vinyl roof, and it doesn't have those other options. And I think it's just absolutely perfect in Cascade Green. This one was for sale at Competition Cars. Bill, I don't know how he gets these cars. He tends to get a lot of these low mileage originals. This one was spectacular. And to me, this is the pinnacle of Cadillac, the absolute pinnacle in terms of exterior styling, interior styling, not just the theme, but also the materials and the fit and the finish, and pretty good engines under hood as well. Now, this was the second year of this particular body style, and it actually has quite a bit of sheet metal differences versus the 1965 model. The 1965 model would be the first year of these so-called stacked headlamp Cadillacs that would last through the 1968 model years, a very brief run before in 1969 they would go back to the horizontally oriented headlamps. And the front end was, let's say for the 69, oh my goodness, that was a loud and proud front end. But I think of the mid-60s Cadillacs, 1966 is my favorite. I love the style. I love the interior. So let's talk a little bit more about it. So up front, I already mentioned that this was the first of the stacked headlamp Cadillacs. And you can see one of the things that apparently the designers were struggling a little bit was that front fender profile above the headlamps. And you'll see here it kind of has this shape where it dips down as it comes forward on the car and then is radiused around the edges. That apparently was patterned off of the grille on Miller race cars. That was something that Bill Mitchell absolutely loved, the styling vice president of General Motors at the time. And you see a lot of cars that have a very similar fender profile. Even the Chevy Nova or the Chevy 2 of the era has that fender profile. So it made its way onto a lot of different cars, but I think it's very successful here. You also have the absolutely full-width wall-to-wall grille, and in 1966, they did change the grille texture from kind of thin horizontally oriented bars to this egg crate texture, and I love that the turn signals are inset into the egg crate. In 1965, those turn signals would be inset in that front bumper. So one big change there, they had to change the center section of the bumper. Notice that the bumper is three pieces, that it has that center section and then the outer edges. So Cadillac was able to do a little bit differently on the 66 and just change that center section of the bumper versus the outer edges. One other thing I will point out is that Cadillac, unlike some of the other car companies and divisions, always had this pretty nice front license plate integration, and that continued on for many years into the late 1970s. I guess they really just tried to design that into the car as opposed to some other car makes where that front license plate was just an afterthought and tacked on with a bracket. Not so with Cadillac during this time period. Now, as we rotate to this front three-quarter view, this is where it gets a little bit interesting because there's quite a few changes from the 65 model year. The 65 and 66 fender are completely different, and the 65, if you look at the inset, you can see that this character line runs kind of all the way from the front of the car and then becomes the wheel arch, and then beneath it is this supersized cornering lamp. By the way, Cadillac was the car company that introduced cornering lights to the market in 1962. So that was something that they introduced and they were proud about. But by 1966, they had changed the fender and eliminated that character line. Perhaps it looked a little bit too busy, and I think that's why I like the 66 versus the 5. It looks less busy with that grille in 66 and without that character line on the fender. I think this just looks better and is a cleaner profile. So quite a few sheet metal changes. I believe the hood is interchangeable, but the fenders are different. And obviously, like I said, the grille and the center section of the bumper is different. Now take a look here, and you've got this extremely flat belt line back by the doors, and the idea here was really to accentuate the car's overall length. And you certainly get a sense of the length. This is a very clean car, clean body size, relatively unadorned. There's obviously the chrome trim on the lower portion here and some bright work around the daylight opening. And of course, unfortunately, the door edge guards. But aside from that, this is a pretty clean and lean car. And this was something that was really a new styling philosophy for Cadillac in 1965. If you look at the 1964 Cadillac, it still has these little fins on it and quite a bit of bright work. And this 65 was Cadillac's response to the 1961 Continental, which was this very Bauhausian, minimalist, reduced vehicle. And the 65 Cadillac was, like I said, what Cadillac designers thought a Cadillac should be in that similar vein. So yes, Lincoln did actually kind of play or force Cadillac's hand to change their styling philosophy, at least for a few years. And then it kind of went back to the gaudy and garish philosophy, particularly by 1969. And the other thing I will point out is the sections here are beautiful. They kind of have this convex surface on the body sides, but again, really not much in terms of ins and outs. Very clean, very 1961 Continental-ish. You don't have the 61 Continental roof where you have that distinct kind of trough between the outer edge of the door and the glass plane shoved inboard. You got a super minor amount of that here. Of course, you don't have the bright work that trims the belt line as well as the fender peaks and the quarter panel peaks like you did on the 61 Continental. But you do have a great, I think, interpretation of what a Cadillac should look like. Nobody's going to mistake this for a Lincoln. This still is very Cadillac-y. But again, a very different styling philosophy from 1964 or even, let's just say, 1959 to 64. I would kind of group those together in terms of one styling philosophy. And then you have the 65 and 6. In fact, I believe the 65 Cadillac was done in an advanced studio. It was not even done in the Cadillac regular production studio. And that studio was led by an individual by the name of Bernie Smith. And Bernie was known as a great designer at General Motors. But again, getting that different look, this came from something other than the production studios. And that's probably one of the reasons why it had a distinctly different appearance. Now, in this photo, you can see a little bit more of that flat belt line. And then you also notice that there's lots of vent windows in this car. Vent windows in the front, vent windows in the back. Those are all power. So on each side, you have 4 power windows, a total of 8 power windows. Wait till we get to the interior and you take a look at the driver's side master control for all of these windows. It's pretty amazing. But again, very Cadillac-style features. You have that prow on the hood. You've got the shoulders that kind of run from the A-pillars out to the front section of the hood. You also have the typical Cadillac manufacturing philosophy where the hood extends all the way to the front and then curls over, a cheaper method of manufacturing than if this were a so-called trapped hood that would have a front area in front of it. But Cadillac, for whatever reason, the cars look great, and then they got a faster and cheaper production-style hood. And Cadillac did that for many years, just had the hood that went all the way forward, whereas like my 71 Granville, you have the trapped hood that you have to make sure has the right dimensions on 3 sides. Here, you just have to make sure that the left and the right side look good. You don't have to worry about a gap at the front of the hood. I just thought I would show this picture as well of the mini shoulder, I'll call it, there, the crease that comes kind of partway out on the door there, and how it just beautifully transitions on the rear from the door up into the quarter panel to make that flat surface. Wow, what an amazingly styled car. Now, as we transition to the rear of the car, you'll notice the rear overhang. This is a long car for the era. 227.5 inches in overall length, just about a foot shy of 20 feet. And the Fleetwood and the Fleetwood Brougham rode atop 133-inch wheelbase. The DeVilles and the Calais rode atop 129.5-inch wheelbase. So you got more wheelbase with your Fleetwood than you did with the regular series DeVille. This was back in the time when it was thought that the more expensive the car, the bigger that it had to be. So even the top-of-the-line Chevrolet Caprice in this time frame was shorter than, let's say, an Olds 98, which was shorter than the Cadillac Fleetwood. I should say 98 was shorter than the DeVille, which was shorter than the Fleetwood, and so on and so on. So This car is long. But I love the shape of the rear quarter here. Look at it, it's almost perfectly flat, very atypical for a Cadillac. That would be typical of Fords, like the Continental, as I mentioned, but not something that you often saw in Cadillacs. You don't really have a tapered deck lid here either. Pretty flat profile, which was rare for Bill Mitchell and General Motors design. Bill Mitchell loved tapered deck lids. You can actually see the Cadillac limousine there in the background that has a tapered deck lid. And it was just something that was a very typical GM theme. But you also see the pretty formal and chunky C-pillar to give you privacy in the back, a throwback to the coach building days, the kind of Frenched-in back window that's a little bit smaller than it could otherwise be. The quarter and how it has, I love how it mimics at its termination point the shape of the tail lamp. And wow, that tail lamp, as we're going to see in a second, is a thing of beauty, although because it has no exposed screws, and Cadillac, for whatever reason, the engineers did not believe that you should be able to access the bulbs from the trunk. They were worried about water intrusion. You pretty much have to drop the bumper on these cars to change the taillight bulbs. So that is true and shocking, but it is true only for the 66. That's the only year where that is the case. All the other model years, you can access the bulbs either from the exterior or from inside the trunk. But the designers, Wayne Cady in particular, who did that tail lamp, did not want exposed screws, and so there was no serviceability for the tail lamp bulbs, amazingly, on this car. And here you can see a little bit closer the fine detail of the tail lamp, even the lens, with these little ribs, and there's no exposed screws, for better or worse here. But kind of like this Gothic style, cathedral style tail lamp. This car is in beautiful shape. This is a 24,000 mile original car, original paint, original interior. Oh my gosh, I would have loved to have this one. Heartbreaker, Bill, if you're watching this video. Next time you get something like this, which is probably going to be a couple years from now, be sure to contact me because I would love to have something like this. Wow, what a car. Just beyond the condition of this one, just the perfect style, and wait till we get to the interior because this is where it really starts to get special. All right, now let's transition to the interior of this beauty. And wow, take a look at that embroidered cloth. It looks so rich. It has such a sheen to it. Fantastic. And you can see the door panel there in the background. That is real wood trim. That is not fake wood trim. Every piece of material on this interior really is Cadillac. And unfortunately, after this, particularly by the late 1960s and then really into the early 1970s, the material quality would just plummet on Cadillac interiors. Not so here. It's hard to see with the doors open, but this car also has one of the earlier IP flowing into the door themes. Notice that the IP is curving at the outer edges. And when you close the door, it wraps into the door. And so does the lower portion. Notice the armrest on the door panel in the background. That armrest also flows into the IP. The front edge touches up with and mates up with an area in the IP. So it's just a harmonious, beautiful interior. I think George Moon was the interior chief of Cadillac during this era. And oftentimes the interior designers don't get the glory that the exterior designers do, but here they definitely deserve it. This interior is fantastically simple and just a great theme. Simple in terms of the overall theme, but beautiful in terms of its execution. Just elegance is, I think, how one could best describe it. And here we have a shot of the odometer. You can see, like I said, this is an original 24,000 mile car. Cadillac at least gave you a temperature gauge. Didn't really get anything else. Idiot lights for all the other warning lights. You did get 3-speed wipers, low, medium, and high. And then you notice it says climate control. This car did have automatic climate control. Cadillac would introduce automatic climate control to the industry in 1964. It'd actually take Lincoln 2 additional years until 1966 until they introduced their variant. By that point, you could pretty much get it in almost any General Motors division. Cadillac had a 1-year exclusive amongst the GM divisions for automatic climate control in 1964 before the other divisions had the potential for getting it in 1965. And take a look at the driver's side master control. There is a litany of switches here. You have the 4 for the vent windows, 2 front, 2 rear, the 4 main windows. Then you have a lockout switch for the windows up at the top. Wow, that is a lot of switches that you had to navigate if you were the driver of this vehicle. Also notice the beautiful real wood on the door panel here. As I mentioned, this is real wood. And Cadillac sure used a lot of it on this 1966 interior. It's kind of like a full plank of wood, but it looks fantastic. Now, of course, with the Fleetwood, you had to get a large trunk. And trunks were pretty big in these 1960s era cars, but given the long wheelbase and the 227.5 inches of overall length, you got extra trunk in these Cadillacs. Cavernous would be an appropriate adjective for it. And if you look at the deck lid, there's a sticker on this one. This one has the optional Positraction rear end, and it tells you to make sure that you don't jack the car up with the engine running and the car in gear. I'm not quite sure why somebody would do that, but they had to put the warning label here to make sure that you're aware not to do that. And that was a sticker that was on the deck lid of many different GM vehicles during this time, not just exclusive to Cadillac. Now, under a hood for 1966 was Cadillac's 429 cubic inch V8 that made 340 horsepower. This was an enlarged engine versus the 390 cubic inch Cadillac V8 that was introduced in 1963. Now, Cadillac had a 390 cubic inch V8 before 1963, but it was redone and pretty much an all-new engine for 1963. It was lighter and stronger. And for whatever reason, when Cadillac introduced their new engine for 1963, it was the exact same size as the 390 for 1962, even though they're two different engines. Now, after only one model year, Cadillac enlarged the engine to 429 cubic inches, and it would stay at 429 cubic inches for 1964, 5, 6, and 7. And that would be the end of this engine. Before, in 1968, Cadillac would introduce their all-new 472 cubic inch V8. Now, why would Cadillac develop an all-new V8 in 1968? Well, for whatever reason, when Cadillac re-engineered that engine for 1963, the largest that it could go was 429 cubic inches. So that was the maximum size limit of the engine. And by this point, Chrysler had a 440, Lincoln had a 460. Cadillac was getting a little jealous. Actually, even 1966 Lincoln, I should say, had a 462 because that was the enlarged MEL engine that was previously 430 cubic inches. So Cadillac was getting a little bit jealous, and they decided to beat them all with their 472 cubic inch V8 in 1968, which would become 500 cubic inches in the Eldorado only for 1970, and then that would eventually proliferate across the Cadillac lineup beginning in 1975. The 472 was dropped, and you just got a standard 500 cubic inch V8 in all Cadillacs. For 1975 and in 1976, that was the same, except in the Seville, where you got the Oldsmobile 350 cubic inch V8 topped by a Cadillac exclusive fuel injection setup. But regardless, the 429 was a pretty good engine. The only thing that they had was some timing cover issues in the oil pump and the timing cover. If you didn't change the oil often enough, the oil pump would kind of eat into the aluminum timing cover. But in general, a good engine and one of the last of the really reliable Cadillac V8s. That architecture, as well as the one that followed it, the 472, the 500, later the 425 and 368, those really were Cadillac's last real V8s that had extremely good reliability. After that, it was really tough on Cadillac, and you have the HT4100 4.1 liter V8 that came into play in 1982 that had some, let's just say, significant challenges. So what do you think of this beautiful 1966 Fleetwood 60 Special? Put a comment in the comment section. Thanks again for watching.